Necroplasm is symbiotic by nature. It requires a host in order to function properly. It seeps into his wounds, mixing with blood, permeating his organs, eating the marrow from his bones, recreating the host for its own needs. But Eddie Beckett doesn't understand any of this. He only understands the podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of Spawnography. I am one of your hosts, Pierce Leiden, pronouns they, them, here with, as always, the lovely
George Marston, pronouns they, them, or she, her. Pierce, it's so great to see you. This is our first record in 2025, and I gotta say, I'm sure excited for it. My chair's a creaking and I'm a speaking, so.
Yeah, listen, it's we haven't recorded in like 3 weeks, just because the craziness of the holidays and everything, and
yeah,
it's been good. I had a birthday.
That's right. I turned 46.
My hockey team won our championship.
Oh, hell yeah.
4-3, so that was pretty cool.
Nice.
And and then my brother cast one of my kids. Yeah, go Sharks. Then my brother cast one of my hockey kids in a movie that he's casting.
Oh, wow. What movie? Cool. Oh, I guess you can't say.
I don't think I can say. So
why would I even ask that? Tell me the spoilers of it.
I'll tell you off mic, but
yeah. No, of course.
I got a PlayStation VR 2, so now I can live that terrible capitalist future life where I work and then I move to put on my headset and play video games all night.
I have a Meta Quest, which I have not played in some time, but it's pretty fun. I used to play mini golf with my friends quite a bit. I need to hit them up.
Vanessa got me like Horizon, which is this like, there's like metal dinosaurs and like you fight them with bows and arrows and you climb stuff and it's really cool.
Oh yeah, I've seen the ad for it. Haven't played it.
And then I also, because of like PlayStation Premium or whatever, I got like Pistol Whip and a couple other games, which Pistol Whip is just John Wick to trap music.
Nice.
It's like Beat Saber, but with guns, I guess.
Gotcha.
And it's so funny because I had to download Horizon. And so I was like, babe, we can't play that one yet. And like, we're downloading all these games. Like, we have to play something in the meantime. And I was like, you want to play this? It's really fun. I have videos about both my parents doing it. And she's like, I don't know. And then she got way into it. So that was cool. Shout out to my lovely partner for getting me something awesome. And I got a lot of comics and I got a ton of Spawn toys.
Yeah, I saw that. I got some toys, mostly like Marvel Legends, etc., and related stuff. But that's cool. I had a pretty low key Christmas with the family. That's about it. I've been off work for a while, so I haven't had that much human contact outside of like my family and stuff. So that's about it. Ironically, when I was doing the VR thing, I played a lot of mini golf with my friends because it was like a pretty fun mini golf game. I did the shooting gallery a lot, like the actual target shooting, because I used to do that when I was in high school. I used to have trophies.
Oh, wow.
That we didn't know that one.
I learn new lore about you all the time on this show.
It's a deep well. And then also, I'm always looking for, like, the thing I always wanted to find was just a cool, like, starship exploration flying game where you're not fighting stuff. It's not necessarily like a starfighter, because they have those and they're okay. They're just really, like, hard to follow for my 40-plus-year-old eyes. But just like a game where I can just fly around space pushing buttons in a cockpit would be, like, peak for my VR experience.
You like the Star Wars game. I know that's not words that you expected to come out of my mouth, but Star Wars, it's like Tales of the Galaxy or whatever. You just
Oh, okay.
start up on a freighter, and you got to like open doors and walk around and like fix things. So it's
That
like,
sounds fun.
yeah, it is actually really fun. It is a little frustrating because like if you don't have enough space or you're not totally acclimated to the motions that you need to do things, like
Right.
I just could not get into the pack my like bandolier where my items were. I just like could
Oh.
not reach it. So I just like so glad that I do VR in the privacy of my own home and that nobody can see me doing it because I probably look insane.
That seems like something where there's probably videos on YouTube, like funniest VR compilations, and it's just like people's parents playing VR, but like from the outside, like them just trying like grabbing it themselves like a chimp.
Yeah, and then I saw Sonic 3 in 4DX, which is the best way to see that movie.
I hope that's a dry film. Gonna say, I hope it's
It's
not a
not.
wet movie.
It's a wet film.
No.
And and I got the
Oh my God.
Nosferatu popcorn bucket.
Oh, nice. I've
Yeah.
seen Nosferatu twice Feratu now. I saw it once at home on my WGA
And then you did like a
screener.
Mufasferatu thing.
No, well, so I actually did the Nosfer Baby Ratu girl. I got to credit my sibling Max for that, but I did. I watched Nosferatu and then I watched Baby Girl. And let me tell you, Baby Girl is a wild movie that is all about Nicole Kidman wanting to be a dog. And I'm
I've
not
heard it's
going to go
also
deeper
a
than
wet
that,
film.
but it's dry. Let me tell you, in my house, it was quite dry, like a catcher's mitt around my place. That is not a sexy film. It is a sexual film, but I think it is a purposefully unsexy, unerotic film. That is not like a you should be feeling hot to this movie.
Is it less erotic than when she does the introduction to AMC theaters monologue?
I don't know. Because I've only ever seen that once. There's not an AMC around me.
Fair
I
enough.
only know it by the memes. I will say this 2024 wound up being quite a year for older actresses getting just fully nude on camera and really owning their bodies in quite an interesting way with their performances. Because again, much like The Substance with Demi Moore, very sexual film, not a very sexy film. In both cases, I think the actors involved put forth really incredible performances. I think in the case of Baby Girl, that is a strange movie that took me a long time to figure out. And once again, it's all about Nicole Kidman wants to be a dog. And I'll just leave it at that. So if that sounds good.
Another actress having a small resurgence is Pam Anderson too, right? For The Last Showgirl.
Oh,
I haven't seen it,
yes. I
but
haven't
you're
seen it
right.
either.
There's kind of a trend of older kind of actresses kind of
Yeah,
making a
gotta
little
say,
comeback. Always
I've
fun.
seen Pam Anderson out there. I saw her on her Criterion Closet video.
Oh yeah, that was great.
She's looking gorgeous. Not to reduce her to that, because a large part of her current presence is to not say that, but just she's still just an incredibly enchanting and beautiful woman. And I was very delighted to see her depth of film knowledge and her love of acting come through in that video in particular. Makes me really excited to check out that movie and see her performance in that.
Feels like we as a culture owe many an actress an apology, but Pam Anderson, one of the ones that we probably really need to apologize for the way we treated her.
Absolutely. And I'm going to go ahead and drop another bit of lore here that may be known to you, but probably not to our listeners. I have seen every episode of Baywatch at least once. I watched the entire series front to back a few years ago with my roommates, and it's better than Star Wars. I'm just going to go ahead and say, pound for pound, hour for hour, Baywatch is better than Star Wars. If you count how many hours of Star Wars content actually entertain me versus the hours of Baywatch content that deeply entertained and delighted me, it's better than Star Wars. Pound for pound in my house.
Baywatch would be better in 4DX.
Baywatch would be incredibly wet in a lot of ways. That is what a cast of gorgeous Adonises and then like one or two total goofballs. which is a great balance, you know.
They
So
just don't make them like that anymore.
no, they sure don't. You know, but Baywatch, really fun show if you like sitting there for an hour watching bullshit. Speaking of sitting here for an hour doing bullshit, we're 10 minutes in, and it's now time to immediately transition to talking about Spawn so that we don't have another 20-minute conversation about wet films like we previously have done.
Okay. Yeah. Before we have a little bit of housekeeping.
Oh, let's
Excuse
do
me.
it.
A little bit of housekeeping. So we say all the time that if you leave us a review, we'll read it. Now, by the time this episode comes out, we'll have already posted it on Instagram, so you'll know that we know about this and we've shared it with you, our dear listeners. But maybe you're new to the show and you didn't see us post on Instagram. We got a very lovely 5-star review on Apple Podcasts from Rob Duenas, who is the current artist of Spawn Kills Every Spawn.
Hell yeah.
And here's what he had to say. The title is Chains, Capes, and Chatter. He says, all right, real talk. I'm the artist behind Spawn Kills Every Spawn. I've been rocking with Spawn since that very first issue back in 92. So I know my Hellspawn history. This podcast is straight up the best deep dive around. Their issue by issue breakdown is like flipping through all those classic panels, but with hilarious commentary and fresh insights. If you're fiending for that quintessential Spawn fix, trust me, you gotta tune in. Thanks so much, Rob.
What a beautifully kind review. Thank you so much for listening. Spawn Kills Every Spawn. What an awesome concept. Definitely check it out if you haven't. And thank you so much, Rob, for checking out our podcast and for listening along with us. And also for saying we're hilarious.
And have fresh insights. That's always good.
That's true.
Also, Rob will be on our show at some point. Hopefully, fingers crossed. We got to figure out scheduling, but just appeared on the Regarding Spawn podcast.
Yeah.
So check out our homies, John and David.
And of course,
they
we were
had
just
Rob
on an episode as well for Christmas with them.
We were. It was really funny. I listened back to it. We're hilarious.
It's a good episode. We are hilarious. Those guys are hilarious too.
That's true. We had a great time.
Fellows. Listen, I know a thing or two about fellows, and there are a couple of good ones.
Absolutely. So today we've got 2 more issues of original flavor Spawn.
Hell yeah.
Less Curse of the Spawn for a little bit of the foreseeable future. We've got Spawn 73 and 74, beginning of a new arc. This arc is technically 3 issues. We're cutting off the last one because I like where 74 ends, and also we're better at covering 2 issues than we are at covering 3 or 4 or whatever. So,
and also that gives us a chance to highlight what will be another big milestone issue, 75.
Yeah,
which will
absolutely
be another stepping stone on the way to Spawn 100, which is the first really big moment of change in the series. And of course, we'll get there when we get there. But for now, we've got Spawn 73. So, Pierce, please hit me with those credits.
All right. This is Todd McFarlane and Image Comics present The Heap. Story by Todd McFarlane and Brian Holguin. Pencils by Greg Capullo. Inks by Danny Meeke, Todd McFarlane, and Chance Wolfe. Copy editor and lettering by Tom Warzakowski. Colors by Brian Haberlin and Dan Kemp. And also we get a cover art credit here. So cover art by Greg Capullo and Danny Meeke. This one is dedicated to John Leakley.
Oh.
So John Leakley was the creator, writer, executive producer of Kindred the Embraced, as we have discussed previously.
That's right. Kindred the Embraced. Another great show if you want to watch about 12 hours of really interesting, strange 90s TV.
Yep. And in case you need to, get your C. Thomas Howell fix. He was also the executive producer and writer on the Spawn TV show and received an Emmy Award for it. So that's why he's here.
Nice.
Makes sense. I like that Todd gives flowers. Like, I like that if you have known Todd long enough, you'll eventually get a thank you.
Yeah, it's just a nice little touch to dedicate it to, like, I like that sometimes it's a bigger comics person, probably someone Todd did know, because by this time in the industry he was huge and would have worked with or been around just about everybody. But also sometimes it's behind the scenes people too. He's liable to thank producers and writers and stuff like that. And just cool that he gives that credit for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to get right into Sam and Twitch. being upset about their broken down office building. The elevator doesn't work.
I love this
And
bit because it opens with Sam super overreacting, yelling, "Son of a bitch, why did this have to happen to us? It ain't fair." And my immediate thought was like, oh no, they've lost their office building. And it just turns out that the elevator's broken and they have to use the stairs.
yep, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
You know, they head up the stairs, and of course, who's there to meet them when they enter their office? But the most mysterious man in Spawn's life, Cagliostro,
That's
and
true.
he's got
A
something for them.
dossier.
A dossier.
That's right. We finally opened the thesaurus one page further and found another word besides file. But yeah, he's warning them basically that they have to find Spawn now because something's coming to the alley that's coming to the struggle between heaven and hell, a secret third force that's going to consume them. And if they don't find Spawn, things are going to go really bad really fast. I will say I love this drawing of Cagliostro in the shadows here, this bottom panel where he's like, you can just see his eyes out from under the hat. Capullo et al. Are kind of really starting to nail the like Cagliostro as a Gandalf type in the art. And it's really fun. I like the panels where you can just see his eyes and like his hair kind of coming out from under the hat.
Feels like they've kind of figured this hat out a little bit too.
Yes, it's looking a little better. It's looking a little less like the Pharrell like hat from a reference from like 14 years ago. That's probably the most current thing I know. But yeah, they're kind of, the hat's looking better. They're kind of nailing that man of mystery look a little more. And yeah, again, they say he's gone. What's that on the desk? And Sam says some kind of dossier, which I lit up. I was like, wow, it's an alternate version of a file. And of course, it's the dossier of Lieutenant Colonel Al Simmons, who is, as we all know, and Sam and Twitch will now soon understand, the true identity of Spawn. We then get to Rat City.
I have a question for you with regards to Brian Holguin coming onto the book as kind of co-writer or co-plotter, or it's unclear how they divvy things up.
Uh-huh.
But there has seemed to be a lot more momentum where previously Todd was very happy to just kind of have characters do their own thing, very siloed, right? They exist in the same world. They don't necessarily cross over. And also he was like obsessed with checking in with them all the time. Here's what they are all doing very separately that has very little to do with anything or each other. And Holguin seems to have like lit a fire under the narrative in terms of just being like, Todd, they have to interact with each other. How do they not know? We can't keep referencing something from like issue 5, 70 issues later. I mean, in real time, it has been 5 years.
Yeah, I think that it feels like you're exactly right, where a lot of the time Todd is really good at build up. And then when you get to the end of the build up, it's like another thing that's going to build up again, which is something you have to do in comics a little bit. But it feels like Holguin coming in is saying like, okay, we need to actually start paying some of this off. You know what I mean? We got to start having answers to some of the questions. We got to start understanding what Spawn's role is actually going to be, which I think is, for the first time ever, actually going to be specifically laid out in these issues. We're going to get a very specific and very clear and straightforward explanation of why Al Simmons, the Hellspawn, is so important in the war between heaven and hell for the first time ever. And it's going to be a lot less, don't you understand, you're important, and a lot more of, here's why Spawn's important. So I think at some point, yeah, Holguin comes in and says, let's start answering the questions and using that to move forward into the next thing, rather than just coming back to the point where we have questions again and back resetting the status quo almost issue by issue is a storytelling tactic that's very rooted in older comics. You know, we've talked about that before.
Yeah, there's a sense kind of in Todd's initial writing that like he just never it almost feels like he was almost like writing every issue without knowing what the next issue was going to be.
Well, at some point, I think he might have been.
Right, especially with the personal sort of things that he was dealing with.
Yeah, and the
And I
business
think,
stuff, and yeah.
yeah, oh, exactly. And so I think having Holguin on board has really focused the book. I think that it's also helping that there might be an ending for some of these characters, right? Like that, like it's
Right.
giving us a sense as a reader that like somebody might be gone. Like we're taking things off the board, which we've kind of done before, but it's so interesting how the stakes of the story have changed. Like we are not talking about Tony Twist anymore. We
Right.
are not like really dealing with Jason Wynn too much. I mean, he's important here and we're going to get into that, but like his like
We're
deal
not
with
getting as much cut back to him and have Clown like just whispering in his ear, trying to figure out what to do next. There's not as much of that.
yeah.
It's much more like feels like there's a roadmap.
Yeah, absolutely. So they've got this dossier
Yes.
on Lieutenant Colonel Al Simmons, and they're gonna start to learn about him. We're gonna check back in at Rat City with our renegade angel Bootsy, and he's checking in
Yes.
on Bobby, whose life he had saved, and now
I like this caption. Rat City, the shadow-drenched demimonde of the city's outcasts.
he's pretty sure that he's gonna face like heaven's retribution now,
Yeah, because he saved Bobby's life in the gang war. Bobby, his
and
best
he wasn't
friend.
supposed to.
Yeah, he's not supposed to interfere. He's supposed to Uwatu this bitch. And instead he Uwatu'd this bitch.
Yeah, like we talked a little bit about the dichotomy of angels and still not really understanding it. Like I guess like it's like a lion thing where like the male well not even really because Abdiel was like a
Yeah,
hunter
I think
and
the female male thing has been kind of ditched at this point
hmm,
in favor of just having what seems to be
or
really
like
consistent.
ranks.
Yeah, there are ranks. It's very ranked. That seems to be what's consistent and important is that heaven has this deeply ordered hierarchy and no one is allowed to question it or cross the line. That was the lesson of Abdiel. He thought he was going to do better. He thought he
Right.
could serve God's will better than God's will. And that was too far a line to cross. And so I think that's kind of the thing with the people of heaven, angels of any station or stripe, is that they're bound by certain laws and duties and hierarchies that they have to follow.
Do you think that that is because we got such a like regimented hierarchy of the levels of hell way back that to not have something similar for heaven felt like a missed opportunity, and so like that might be why that aspect is now coming in.
I think it's sort of that. I think it's maybe happened. I think it maybe started just by happenstance by like people like, Neil Gaiman and Grant Morrison understanding something about angelic mythology and putting that structure into the story. I want to say Todd has capitalized on it. And we've discussed this before about how the order of hell seems to be might makes right. And if you can back up a decision that you make, then that was the right decision. They rule not by a structured hierarchy that has one above all, but by a hierarchy of strength where the strongest demon reigns. And that's how we know that Malbolgia was not always the crowning demon of that realm. There were demons before Malbolgia, and there are demons still above Malbolgia in other realms of hell. So I think it's a matter of showing that hell has a very selfish, very untrusting kind of structure
Hmm.
that is based on might makes right, and heaven has a structure that is based entirely on trust and faith and trusting that the order that you're given is the will of God through whatever messenger that voice is coming.
Hmm.
So I think it's a matter of heaven's hierarchy is based entirely on faith, where the hierarchy of hell has no faith in anyone.
I like that. I think it also helps to give a human character that's close to Spawn a lot more importance to the narrative. Now we find out Bootsy's not a human, but that's fine. Now we know why Bootsy and Bobby kind of keep showing up, sort of.
But it gives them something to do more than just be sad in the alley.
No, 100%. I think that, again, with talking about Holguin helping focus the narrative, instead of cutting back, like, and we will cut back to Terry and Wanda, but in a way that is so specific to what is going on in these two issues,
Right.
rather than like making a phone call or something, you know, like
right, just seeing a moment in their day.
It gives stakes now to the night people that they maybe didn't totally have before. Cagliostro now feels like this in-betweener type of character, sort of this like phantom stranger type of, like, he's more mysterious now, even though he tends to mostly tell us stuff.
Right.
He seems to be right about the stuff he tells us when he tells us things. Bootsy's taking care of Bobby. Bobby's still in rough shape, but he's kind of apologizing to him and saying, like, hey, take it easy. I might have to go away, maybe for good. Cagliostro says, yeah, you meddled in the affairs of mortals, and, there might be celestial retribution. Him and Bootsy, I kind of like the two of them fighting because it makes more sense than Al constantly fighting with Cagliostro at this point. However, it does sideline Al a little bit and give him like one less thing to do, which is interact with Cagliostro. So
true, but Bootsy is an interesting character. It's grown on me by this point, his like angelic station. This panel of him and Cagliostro face to face, where Cagliostro's saying, enough, now's not the time for petty squabbling. Bootsy's got quite a dick nose, like just a straight up like dong
that's
on
been
his
happening
face.
a lot more lately.
And like even the way it's colored, it
weird.
looks pretty specific. Meanwhile, Cagliostro looks great. He looks more and more like the fucking Gandalf on the cover of the Rankin Bass Lord of the Rings VHS. You know what I'm saying? With the sword. Anyway, this is where Spawn's actual place in the hierarchy of heaven and hell is laid out. Cagliostro says, enough. There's no time for petty squabbling. I need to find Spawn. The survival of both our camps depends on it. He says, there's a storm gathering, a third force which lies between heaven and hell. It cares nothing of the war we wage, but it could prove the undoing of the hell spawn. If Al Simmons perishes, we both know what happens next. The final battle will commence, and Earth will be torn apart in the process. So I kind of stumbled over it there, but the important part is, if Al Simmons perishes, the war between heaven and hell will begin. For whatever reason, his death is the dividing line, is the shots fired. And like you said, this is great.
It puts so many, like, what we felt were disparate threads, it starts to really pull them together. This is why God said he's the one. This is why, he's sort of, after issue 50, he's actually even able to kind of come back, right?
He's gotten really so many literal get out of jail, get out of hell free cards in a way.
Yeah.
That now it kind of explains why. Because Malbolgia, as they state, when Bootsy's like, okay, we got to find him, Cog is like, why are you so eager to find him now? And Bootsy's straight up like, look, man, facts are facts. God's lazy. He's losing ground with souls. And Malbolgia is just surpassing him in his army. We know that Hell's job on Earth is to send souls to Malbolgia to build that army. We now understand why he's come back from hell so many times. Why Malbolgia has said, I'm pulling the strings. Even when you think you're winning, when you're coming back to Earth after our encounters, I'm the one behind all that. Because he's delaying that war as long as he can to make sure that when it breaks out, as Bootsy says, the armies of hell will engulf and destroy the armies of heaven. It's a great, great, great explanation. And it's so simple.
It's also just finally an explanation.
Yeah. And I think you're right about Brian Holguin coming in and kind of, I want to say Todd probably had some seed of what that would be already in place. But I think it's Brian Holguin coming in and at least saying, all right, well, we got to pull the trigger on saying that. We got to pull the trigger on setting those stakes. And those stakes will be set very quickly as we continue into this two-parter.
Yeah, I think a mark of some of the most memorable stories in comics in general are that as a reader, the stakes are really clear. Um, this is not maybe a perfect one-to-one, but I was just rereading some Superior Spider-Man. That concept from its outset is like stakes incarnate, because as a reader, you're like, well, Peter Parker has to come back.
Yeah.
At some point, Peter Parker will come back, because that's how comic books work. So
Right.
even like on a meta level, it kind of works. But like in the story, you're watching Doc Ock wrestle with all of this, and also wrestle with the fact that, well, eventually Peter Parker might try, like something's going to happen. He kind of knows too. And it sort of sets the story on rails, like with no breaks. And that's what these two issues feel similar. Stuff starts happening and we can't, Spawn can't deal with it fast enough. Cagliostro can't deal with it fast enough. Something's going on. And as a reader, we're sort of like left like with a little bit of whiplash in a good way.
Yeah.
So
now we catch up with Eddie Beckett. We saw him a couple issues ago. He's a guy who's been down on his luck. I think, didn't it say his wife and his child died? And he lost his apartment, something like that. Basically, his whole life fell apart, and he's now found himself in the alleys. And while he was in the employ of the Freak, he found a bag of necroplasm that was left behind after the whole war with Spawn and his apparent death and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So he's now got this necroplasm that's like chatting him up. It's like bigging him up, you know, his ego's up, and he's like now started working for this minor crime family here who has a front in a convenience store where they count on this guy to come in and tell them like where are rich cars to boost and like easy scores to make and stuff like that in exchange for like cigarettes and booze and maybe some money.
Yeah, he's like a pretty low level informant, and do we even find out the name of the
folks
he works for?
They're like the Dominos or something like that. He says, you don't mess with the Dominos or whatever it is.
It's so relatively unimportant who they are that the story kind of breezes through it, which is nice. And there's no like he actually works for Vito Gravano and all that. Like there's none of that. Right. It's just let's go. You know who this guy is.
He's working for this minor crime family. They get word that he's holding out on some big score that he found, not giving it to them as he's supposed to do by their, you know, criminal trade. And the scion here of the Domino family confronts Eddie in the alley and says, I hear you got something that's valuable. You're holding out on us. And Eddie shows him the bag of necroplasm. And the guy's like, what the hell? It's a bag full of snot. And kind of stabs Eddie in the stomach, leaves him for dead with the necroplasm close by. Now, as we know, and as we discussed in the intro, necroplasm is symbiotic. It's part of the process of turning a person into a hellspawn. But here, there is no connection to hell. It's just a bag of basically Spawn's blood and guts that is now seeping into this errant corpse of this poor man, Eddie.
Yeah, it's like pure hellspawn energy without any of the connection to the realm, essentially.
And of course, without an actual like symbiote suit anything to be a part of.
Oh yeah,
there's no K7 Letha type symbiote hellspawn suit in the actual equation.
I guess in a way, it's probably more K7 Letha's blood, essentially.
Well, no, that's from inside Spawn. As we all know,
that's
Spawn
true.
himself weighs well over 400 pounds because of the cement-like weight of the necroplasm that fills his body.
Right.
And that's why he doesn't have an actual heart or guts.
How heavy is that bag?
Heavier than you think.
Then
probably
also,
a 40-pound bag of necroplasm.
Wouldn't it fall right out the bottom of a paper bag?
Well, it's necroplasm, so probably not for whatever reason. It's story-proof, so...
Got it. The bag has plot armor.
Exactly. And it gives it to Eddie, who in his dying moments, inhales some of the necroplasm crawls up into his stab wounds and rips him apart from the inside out. Which this whole sequence rules.
Yeah, it's really cool.
This like zombifying, like face melting drawing down here of him going, "What's happening to me?" Looks like a fucking like that looks like an album cover. That's so sick. I love that.
So gnarly. I love the next page where he's this like giant spine of garbage and junk with like a zombie at the top, his like leg flying out.
And then that spine is like kind of got all the like trash and junk wrapping around it as he becomes the Heap. I love I actually love the captions here, and it says, "In the toxic yellow light of the street lamps, the creature rises." And first off, I gotta say, this whole sequence artistically fucking rules. Greg Capullo drawing the Heap, he is clearly having a blast. The coloring on both of these issues is so good. It's so much fun. It's so engaging. I was so into the art on this whole two-parter that I was just like, it's all clicking in such a good way. There have been some ups and downs with the coloring, but like here, if you look at the page where like the garbage spine is building, you get just that like highlight of the moon behind its body. And then on the next page, they really let the Heap and its big chunky inks take up space with that big green grin that kind of mimics Spawn's green eyes. It's so good. I just love the art in this whole two-parter. The colors in particular just really work for me.
I really
especially
like
as we get into the next sequence.
I really like too that from that initial transformation kind of page, we see the sun setting, and that's followed through on in the Heap reveal as well as the background. We have the same gradient. It's just very consistent. Around the Heap, I kind of like love all the smoke coming off of him and the little bits of light coming from around him that are sort of backlighting him. It's just it's really awesome.
That smoke could easily have been that kind of like computer effects they were doing for a while, which would have diminished this so much.
Yeah, the fact that it's on the page is really, really, really important. So great job, Brian Haberlin and Dan Kemp and the rest of the art team. Really, this is some excellent stuff. It notably, and there's going to be a panel in the next issue that I'll call this out. And again, there's a little Chris Pacello with Tim Townsend inking kind of feeling to it.
I can see it.
Saying that mostly like in the Heap's hands and stuff.
Yeah, no, I can see the comparison for sure. Especially the stuff Chris Bacalo was doing at this time. Bacalo? I don't know how the fuck you say his name.
It's Bacalo. I think it's Bacalo.
Bacalo. Chris Bacalo. That's what I always thought. Okay, great.
Like Greg Capullo.
The next page here is just a series of news reports from 10 years from now where they talk about the temperature in New York is getting up to 130. They're blaming it on the climate, and they say that can't be possible because it's just in New York. And then they had to shut down a movie about terrorists called The Third Rail. Then, of course, the Vortox and Cybok Hour, which I'm pretty sure, I know Cybok is like, I think that's Spock's father or something, or his evil brother. I think that, I don't know. Cybok is a Vulcan. I'll tell you that.
What's Vortox then?
I don't know, dude. Probably some other thing. I don't know. But he's saying that like it's probably the nuclear waste they secretly have been burying beneath Manhattan. I gotta say, seeing these people be like temperature soaring to 130, we don't understand why. It was like, yeah, me either. It felt like seeing these guys today.
There's also the first queer character in Spawn Comics mentions at the end of his little section says Mike Ovitz, where are you when we need you? Mike Ovitz, at the time that this comes out, which I think is 98, would have just left, or it is 98, would have just left being president of Disney.
Oh,
He
Okay.
served as a president of Walt Disney Company for only 16 months, from October of 95 to January of 97.
Wow.
He was also the co-founder
Illustrious.
of CAA, the Creative Artists Agency, because he
Oh,
was a
okay, great.
talent scout and talent agent. Anyway, that's why people listen to this podcast, to find out what all the little names mean.
Yep. I love the colors on this page in particular, where we get the heat wave. The midday sun burns the city like a hot coal. It's a type of heat that causes passions to rise with the mercury. This is very like noirish, very like there's 1,000 stories in the naked city, and this is just one of them kind of vibes, you know?
Yeah, I like the next line that's like, the kind of heat that makes loyal husbands and wives rashly pack their bags and abandon their spouses, their children without a word, that leads quiet, sensible men to lonely rooftops where they look down on the city with murder in their minds.
Amazing.
Great.
Summer of
Love it.
Sam was still a year out. I was wondering if like this was directly influenced by that, because the narration and the vibes are so similar. Summer of Sam, immaculate movie. I know it gets kind of weird reviews sometimes, but I love it. And Spike Lee is a fantastic director.
Spike Lee, come on the show.
Spike Lee direct a fucking Spawn movie.
I wish.
That would be incredible. It would be so weird. Spike Lee as Spawn.
John Turturro is Jason Wynn.
Also, though, this does kind of remind me a lot of Do the Right Thing, with like the kids playing in the hydrant, people fanning themselves. It really does remind me of that, because that movie also takes place in a heat wave. You know what? Spike Lee really likes to make a movie set during a heat wave, doesn't he?
He does.
But it's like Shane Black in Christmas.
So we get this heat wave, scenes from the heat wave, and then we get our first. We haven't seen Spawn in a bit, so
no, this is our first.
Yeah, Spawn's here. He's finding Bobby. He's like, "Where's Bootsy? You need to find him." I think Bootsy's got the answers. There's some angels and vampires and something else. I don't know what's going on. And Bobby is still very confused and will not. He will not accept that everybody has just told him that Bootsy is an angel. He's just kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, they don't know. They don't really process that Spawn is a Spawn. They're just
That's
like, he's just weird like that, our friend Al.
Yeah, which, like, that's good for Al, I guess, and good for the night people being so accepting.
Yeah,
especially this
very
version
affirming
of Al, because he looks insane. He looks awesome. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, yeah.
I love this close-up panel where he says Bootsy is not what he appears. Have you seen him or not? The inking's really cool. The colors are excellent.
You get that slight skullish shape of his nose in there.
Really
cool.
cool.
It's such a great panel. Honestly, this whole sequence of Spawn, kick-ass.
Awesome.
Him leaping through the alleys, his feet like on the ground. You get that one big boot.
Yep. And Bobby tells Spawn that he's gone near the old boarded up bookbinders, and Al recognizes that as the dead zone.
The dead zone.
So, he heads over there. Like you just said, these panels are awesome. Just really good cartooning here. Some really excellent inking. A lot of great texture on this page. It's really well balanced.
That first panel of Spawn against the moon with the rats in the foreground.
So cool.
And the one rat is like looking up at him. What a great panel.
Yeah.
The inking on the rats is just stellar. The texture is beautiful, like you said. This, as far as I'm concerned, is the Spawn art team working at like high potential. They're like really cooking on these issues. This is what I want to see with Spawn.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that it happens with a character like the Heap, who you'd think like, well, the alleys are pretty like gray and dingy all the time. Wouldn't that take something away from the colors or the sort of balance? We're seeing a lot more like swaths of black on these pages. So for as detailed as they are and textured as they are, a lot more black. And that is, and I will say even the coloring has kind of like dialed back some of the computer gradients to allow much more naturalistic colors. They're very subtle with the gradients when they use them. And so it just makes everything
some computer textures in here too. There's, if you look, in the next couple of pages where Bootsy's saying, "Don't play games with me, Cog. This is too important." The background there is definitely a computer insert. That's like a 3D modeled like insert panel.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Anyway, but it fits. It works a lot better than some of the other computer effects they've done.
for sure.
And of course, the heap. So, okay, after Spawn is leaping through the alley looking for Bootsy, he gets to where near where the dead zone is, and what's there but this giant pile of debris? And this whole page, even though it's kind of just explaining what Spawn's doing in the captions, not
I
my
don't care.
favorite
Looks
page in
awesome.
that regard. The storytelling of the actual art is so good, and this reveal of the Heap's face at the bottom with the teeth all jutting out and this weird green slimy tongue
Do you remember the Wolverine and the X-Men #3
where he
cover
fights Krakoa.
with Wolverine like jumping? It's that. That's why I
Yeah.
was like, oh, Chris
Yeah.
Picciolo, Tim Townsend.
I can
that's what-
absolutely see that influence, especially in the way the colors are kind of modeled throughout the Heap. There are so many greens and blues, like and even yellows mixed in there.
Yep.
It's really, really, really terrific coloring, especially for the computer coloring of the time. This would be impressive with today's standards and techniques. You know what I'm saying? Like, sometimes we grade these colors on a curve because it's 1998 and computer coloring was really in its first decade of like mastery and use. And then you see pages like this and the way they handle the Heap, and it's simple, but it looks so striking and so timeless that we immediately connected it to a comic from 2014.
Yeah.
And like I can see that in comics that are coming on the stands today. You can see the artistic influence that it has. And I just want to say, I fucking love the Heap. I fucking love the Heap.
Me too.
Like just an evil grouch, give it to me. He's awesome. Just a big giant trash golem, like a fucking like kaiju almost. So here is where we get basically we get Bootsy and Cog, and this is where Cog is like, I now you want to help him? I thought you didn't care. And they're running as Spawn is swallowed up by the Heap on the final page.
So
and this
cool.
final page, Spawn usually has pretty great final pages. If you can count on one page of the issue to be like a fucking badass page, the last one is often one of them, and it's obviously because you want the reader to leave on a high note going, oh shit, what's going to happen next? It's that like episode, it's like how the Batman 60s series, the first episode of the week would be like, would end with Robin's feet sticking out of a giant clam. So you'd have to tune into the next week or the episode at the end of the week to see what happened next. And here it works. Again, the inking on the Heap here, just so good. Shades of Daniel Warren Johnson, I want to say, and the way the shadows are used and like the inking in his face.
I like that he's like gotten bigger than when we first saw him too. Like his size has changed. And one of the things that I really like about the Heap in general is that this is finally Spawn against his environment.
Yes.
We've typically not gotten that, right? It's usually Spawn against very specific kind of things. We have gotten that in Hell, and that's like kind of the fun connection here. But yeah.
Well, there's another thing here that is starting to spell out what that third force is, and we'll get some more clues about that in a little bit. But it says, for centuries, nature has endured the indifferent offenses of mankind. Beginning tonight, nature is striking back. And it kind of lets you know that, like, whatever the necroplasm and trash are when they mix together, it's coming here seemingly to avenge its own creation. Like the refuse that built it is its own driving force. So yeah, what a final page. So awesome. Spawn barely peeking out there. And it also kind of echoes what happened to the Freak when Spawn had all the like creatures come and like devour him up.
Hell yeah. I like that like nature is becoming this third force. It kind of gives Earth some more stakes within this like war between heaven and hell, because obviously we've seen that, like you said, with like the rats and worms and whatever, we've seen that like, well, that just is used to hell's advantage, right?
Right.
We don't know what the animals like think about it per se, you know. We don't know their feelings about it, but it does feel like now there's somebody, you know, there's somebody who speaks for the trees. They have a Lorax,
Right. They
and we're
have a
gonna find out
Lorax.
who. Yeah, we're gonna find out who that is. That's
Yeah.
gonna move us into Spawn number 74. Todd McFarlane Image Comics presents The Void. Story by Todd McFarlane, Brian Holguin. Pencils by Greg Capullo. Inks by Danny Miki only.
Okay.
Copy editor and lettering by Tom Warzakowski. Colors by Brian Haberlin and Dan Kemp. Cover art by Greg and Todd. This one dedicated, you probably don't know this guy. Gene Simmons.
Who?
Dedicated to Gene Simmons. Yeah, I don't know.
Sounds like a nerd. Must be a
Yeah.
computer guy.
Probably.
Must be Todd's accountant.
Yeah, something like that.
Gene Simmons. Sounds fake.
So we're going to open with another check-in on Sam and Twitch, and they're really digging into this. Well, Twitch is really digging into the dossier and trying to figure things out. Sam is making his New Year's resolutions here.
Yeah, I was about to say this was me 2 days ago, where he's like, he's looking at this bodybuilding calendar of this like super shredded guy, and he's like, unbelievable, unfreaking believable, and all without steroids, if you can believe it. I can't. And Twitch is like, excuse me, sir, you think Al Simmons has been taking steroids? That might explain his tremendous strength. And he says, no, not Simmons. This article on carbo loading and vascular development, advanced nutrient delivery systems. That's going to be me in a couple months, pal. It's all very scientific. And he shows him the hunky guy. And of course, that's going to be me in a couple months, pal. It's all very scientific.
The detail that I really like in the little pinup of this, like, not Arnold Schwarzenegger, is that because it's the centerfold, there's a staple in the middle.
I love the staple in the
I
abs.
just love that,
yes.
that Capullo bothered to draw that. Like, very cool. Didn't have to do that. Thank you, Greg.
It's just those little details that make Greg Capullo such an interesting penciler. Anyway, as I'm about to do, Twitch brings them back to the matter at hand, as he says, where Sam is like, what'd you find out? And he explains Al's whole history. Very compelling. Lieutenant Colonel Al Simmons, excellent student and athlete, war hero, took a bullet in a presidential assassination attempt. He then joins the CIA, goes Black Ops for a while. So far, the same history as Jack Ryan. Shows up in some very interesting places: Angola, Nicaragua, Cambodia. Marries his longtime sweetheart, Wanda Blake. And here's where they start connecting all the dots of Wanda and Terry Fitzgerald and Al both working for Jason Wynn, and all of the implications that brings. They consider briefly whether Al is still working for Wynn. They rule that out based on all the circumstances, but they realize that it's all tied together even further than they thought, and that now that they know who Spawn is, they can see the actual like connections in the web.
I'm happy that this is finally happening. It is a little nuts that it's taken 70 issues to get to this point. And you know what? I'll be kind that it's taken 50 issues to get to this point. You know,
right.
Like, I think weaving these threads together a little sooner would have given Sam and Twitch a little bit more narrative thrust.
Yeah, some agency in the story instead of just wandering around making like the lowest connections. That said, it's one of those things that now that it's here, I'm glad. And when I read this part, much like when I read the explanation of why Al Simmons is important, I was like, finally, we're connecting some dots. We're moving some pieces in a way that's more than just rattling chains and stuff like that, as we often say.
And now they can also ask COG questions that are pertinent to what they're trying to find out. Because before this, it's just that COG is saying stuff. They can actually even talk to Al and be like, this is what we know.
And they might be able to make connections that even those two haven't been able to make because they're actual detectives and connection makers. And perhaps, as we'll see, I'm saying this as a true perhaps they'll wind up serving some function of that for Al Simmons, and maybe that's why he enlisted them in the first place, because he needs someone to help him put the pieces together. We'll find out.
So we're going to cut back to Rat City from here. And Al is still in the grasp of the heap, and so
Yes.
we're in Rat City. The scorching, fetid heat hangs thick in the air. Rodents scurry from their cover, frightened by the terrible din of battle. Get a great choom, of course,
I
and
love that tune as
yeah,
Spawn bursts out of the side of the heap. Every time Capullo draws the heap, it rules. Just the way he draws his face is perfect. It looks awesome. It looks just comic-y enough to also still be like scary and creepy. I love the description of it here. A towering, shambling mound of living refuse, the unleashed fury of a living world which will stand no more abuse.
yeah, yeah.
Spawn has another kick-ass alley fight scene where this time he is fighting a foe that he doesn't know how to really damage, because every time he breaks off some pieces of it, it gets bigger and bigger. It's creating its own symbiotic relationship with the material around it, because the necroplasm doesn't have a Hell's K7 Letha type symbiont to bond with.
Right.
Love the panel of the heap cowering from Spawn's chains as Spawn like bursts its face apart and stuff. And then I love the final panel on the next page where Spawn's just like, it says it gathers itself again, greater than before, and Spawn's just like, damn. And it says, as Spawn stares into the gaping face of doom. And the heap is now towering up to like the size of one of the buildings that are around Rat City.
Yeah, he just keeps
And
getting bigger and bigger and bigger as Cog and Bootsy have now caught up to Al. They thought they were going to warn him about what this is, but it's a little too late.
yeah, and so this panel of them arriving and Spawn kind of like small next to the gigantic heap, with Heap's like glowing eyes and its weird craggy mouth, a full-size dumpster sticking out of its back at this point. It's just like, I love that rumble. And then I love this panel where it leaps and swallows Spawn whole. It looks so
So
awesome.
cool.
The inking, Danny Miki, I got to give it up, crushes the inking on this whole page. Honestly, a great looking issue all around, but
Mm-hmm.
the way he inks the heap is really great. This in particular, he gets all those specks of like material, so much motion, and I love the coloring, like that green glow coming out of its mouth. Just, this is what I love comic books for, because I look at art like this and I see not only just an awesome striking image, but I can see the way it was made and I can see the care that was given by the people who made it. Just a really, really kick-ass looking, exciting comic.
Yeah, this is like the kind of page and the kind of panel that like you want to watch somebody ink.
Yeah,
You know,
it's just so
like that you would
cool.
watch a whole video of watching them just ink it and you just be wrapped. I actually really, I think the pacing on these two issues is a lot better than we tend to get.
Yeah,
One thing is like we have this, big fight, this huge panel. The kind of come down off of that in the narration is really great. So Heap has just swallowed Spawn, and it says an avalanche of pestilence careens down on the hellspawn, consuming him in its wake. The blanket of refuse quivers softly for a moment, like the surf upon the shore, and then is still.
and I love the little bits of trash sweeping up in the wind there.
Yeah. It's like everything was just happening, cacophony and like it's craziness, and now there's nothing.
And the art does such a good job of conveying it. It's so good. This is such a cool sequence. And Bootsy and Cog are like, well, shit. And here's where Bootsy drops the bomb. I spoiled it earlier, but we'll go ahead and reiterate. Here's where Bootsy drops the bomb to Cog that if the war starts now, they're fucked, because Hell's just going to win. What's interesting about this is we know we don't want Hell to win because we've seen a lot of Hell and it's bad. It's torture, it's pain, it's not a place of peace where humans can thrive. If if Earth becomes Hell, we're all fucked. It's eternal damnation. But I'm not yet, as a reader, and I think this is part of the point, I'm not yet convinced that Heaven winning is that good either, because what does that leave us? Just a strict hierarchical order where stepping out of line gets you banished and turned into ash or whatever, you know?
And that really works in line with what the sort of moral compass of this book tends to be. Things are not good or bad. There are just choices that you make. Heaven is not good or bad. Hell is not good or bad. There are just people in charge and choices being made. And like, you can interpret those choices however you choose to interpret them and however that lines up with your, personal moral compass.
Right.
And yeah, hey, it works. I think occasionally we get a little frustrated with that being somewhat wishy-washy, right? We want,
Right.
I think human beings typically like rules in things and just sort of like well, tell me what it is or it isn't. And this is this book's always lived in a gray area. But here it feels like, despite that gray area, there are stakes here.
Yeah.
And I think what this two-parter with the talk of sort of like, nature taking its revenge or sort of deciding to become part of the story, it gives us as normal people a bit of stakes, right?
Yeah.
Because we've seen normal people through the narrative. I think of Fred, the gentleman that Spawn didn't help, right?
We've seen normal people get torn apart when they come in contact with with Al Simmons, you know?
Right. But it feels also like heaven and hell don't really care about them at
No.
all. So
No.
who is on again? Who speaks for the trees? Who's their
That's right.
Lorax?
That's right. And I love this sequence here where Bootsy starts praying and Cog is like, don't waste your time on that bullshit. Do you think the old bugger gives a crap about any of this? And I love where Bootsy just says, don't mock me. I've been patient with you, but you test my limits. And I was just like, oh, okay. Bootsy kind of coming out here. I like it. It's interesting. I like that as we get more of Bootsy as an angel, we're actually getting more of him as a character too, you know, developing more of like the different facets of him.
It's because he knows as much as Cog. Cog has never had a character that he's interacted with know anything
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah.
Bootsy can kind of stand toe to toe with him, and I think that's what I was saying earlier. I think that we really needed this because Cog otherwise is just like, oh God, you stupid idiot Al, or like, here, Sam and Twitch, I don't know, figure it out. And Bootsy gets to kind of push back and be like, dude, knock it off.
Yeah.
Like, you know as well as I do that there's a lot at stake here, and so like, lay off.
Lay off. And while he's kneeling in the refuse praying, he finds something drastic and important, which is the sigil of the Hellspawn, the
The
piece,
trophies,
the
yeah.
trophy, yes, that is left behind, that is basically just Spawn's symbol when the Hellspawn is killed by an angel. Now, in this case, he's been taken by the Heap, but it might as well be just as good as when he gets vaporized, because we'll see next that it's Spawn's absence, Al's apparent defeat, which is going farther than we've ever seen before,
Yeah.
is apparent to everyone.
It's kind of echoing through the threads of the story that we've been told to this point.
Yes, to the point where suddenly Cyan takes her soother, her pacifier, and looks at it and says, uh-oh, he's gone. Wanda says, what's that, baby? Who's gone? And she says, the sad man. Something happened to him, something bad. I like that she calls Spawn the sad man.
Yeah.
That's, I think, the first time we've gotten that. The way we look at it, we know that because of her intrinsic connection to him, because he rescued her from, Spawn rescued her from the clown, Cyan knows that wherever he is, he's not on Earth anymore, and it's not going to be good.
Yeah, the connection has kind of been severed, and what that means, I guess we'll find out. But we check in on Spawn and where he's been since he's been swallowed.
And it's this kind of nice, it's kind of very weirdly serene and philosophical little Alice in Wonderland kind of sequence almost, where he's just falling to the point where you can't tell if he's falling or rising. Really love the captions here. I gotta say, I love where it just says, it kind of says, time melts away, loses its meaning. How long has he been falling? A lifetime? A death time? Long enough for panic to grow into terror, for frustration to bloom into a desperate agony of anticipation. Maybe this is death. No harps, no pitchforks, just an endless, eternal nothingness. But there is no peace in this solitude, no comfort, just fear. Fear and a colossal loneliness that cuts him to the core. And I think, in a way, Todd McFarlane there is describing the surviving experience of death.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the feeling of grief.
We saw something similar after issue 50, right? Where he goes into a space that is the exact opposite of this, right? It's all white.
Yeah,
And he goes into that level of hell that's kind of like all white. And we get that similar kind of feel. I gotta maybe hand it to Brian Holguin here for sharpening this feeling up a little bit.
yeah.
I think it's extremely effective to, and it's a little disconcerting as a reader. We're really not, we've sort of seen this before, but we haven't quite. There's not a lot to grasp onto. The art really works in that sense as well. I think also putting Al against the black background as opposed to a white one um, makes it feel like everything's closing in on him a lot more.
It feels all encompassing and all consuming for him. And as he's falling into nothingness, who should appear but Eddie Beckett,
Eddie
or at
Beckett.
least some kind of specter of him. He says maybe he's a ghost, and he's telling Spawn that it's time to be judged, and that they're calling for him. He's been sent to retrieve him, and Spawn asks who, and he says you'll find out. Spawn asks, how do I get out of here? What is this place? And Eddie says, good question. If I knew that, I wouldn't be here. You're out of luck. And we find out that it's time, Eddie explains to Spawn how he came to be the Heap, or at least came to be part of the Heap. And we don't know exactly where Spawn is. We know the Heap is gone. At least it's dissipated somewhat. And here he is in this black void with Eddie telling him it's time to be judged. And Spawn says, who thinks they can judge me? I really like that. He says, who thinks they can judge me? Who is this that dares to judge me? And that line kind of speaks to who Al Simmons has become as Spawn at this point.
He definitely, at this point as a character, feels like, well, a bunch of shit has happened to me and I've not really been in control of it. So yeah, I understand why he's frustrated there and why he would say that. You know, he doesn't feel that he's done anything that he should be judged for necessarily. Now, that's because he's got some convenient blind spots about things that have happened,
Right.
where he doesn't fully know the outcome of his actions. In some cases, he has had to sort of reckon with that, with like the Frank kids coming back and, you know, telling him what happened. But also Al has this weird bit of ego where I feel like he doesn't necessarily always believe the things that are told to him.
Well, and also he kind of has this feeling of, you don't know what I've been through.
Yeah.
You can't judge the things I've done because you don't know what I've experienced. You can't judge me. And it's not even about not refusing to reckon with the bad things of his life, which I think is also a pattern for Al Simmons. But I think it's also just him saying, like, who thinks they can fucking understand what I've been through enough to judge me? Who is this new person that you say is here? And Eddie turns into kind of this mouthpiece for some force beyond. He says, the Emerald Parliament is waiting. He says, I'm not going anywhere till you explain things. And Eddie says, you have no choice. This is our domain, free from the taints of both heaven and hell. You have no power here. The hour of reckoning is upon you. They go through this spiral portal, and here things go from dark to light. And in the last panels of the issue, Spawn goes through this kind of thorny, spirally doorway, this gateway, into a realm that is very bright, and it's not white, but it's kind of off-white.
Yeah.
And he says, "What is this place? Where am I?" And they say, "You are at the heart of the world, Hellspawn, the place where everything begins. Welcome home, Al Simmons." Just as he reaches out for what else but his own sigil, his own Spawn emblem, the trophy
Dum,
that was
dum,
left behind by
dum.
his death. And that's what's going to lead us into Spawn number 75, which is going to be, I think, a very interesting issue based on what we just read here.
Yeah. This whole sequence, I really enjoyed it. Even though we've only known Eddie Beckett for like a couple issues and we've only known the Heap for a little while, this just feels so focused, so sort of so really laser focused on just getting us somewhere.
The introduction of Eddie to becoming the Heap, to having this moment of confrontation with Spawn, to having the aftermath of the confrontation of Spawn is very fast. It happens mostly over these two issues. We met Eddie and saw the setup with the bag earlier, a couple issues ago, but there are points in the run of this title where that could have been 12 to 15 issues of Cygor tramping across the country, of the Heap slowly forming in Rat City bit by bit every issue. It feels, like you said, extremely focused on getting us to where this story is taking us and where it's leading, getting everybody a step further than where we just were, and not in a way that's going to end with Spawn going, "And anyway, what did you mean by any of that?"
Yeah. And a big part of that is, I think, having Cog having a character to actually bounce off of that can move that part of the story forward, giving Sam and Twitch information. And even though, again, we do kind of sideline Al a little bit, when the focus is put back on Al, that has the effect of kind of two things. Like, one, we're paying way more attention because it's not something we've seen before. And two, we're like, we feel relief to sort of see him again and excited to see him again.
Yeah.
So his like fight with the Heap feels better because we didn't just spend 10 pages of him like being sad in the alley, you know?
Yeah.
So also I really like that our check-in with Wanda and Terry is half a page. We do not need more than that.
And it's very effective. The art's
Yeah.
great. It looks really impactful. I'm at the point where I kind of love the way Greg Capullo is drawing Cyan now.
Mhm.
He's really managing to draw a very, very good cartoon of a child rather than some of the like haunted doll faces we've seen from him and Todd McFarlane and other Spawn artists. Children are consistently a weak spot. So love to see that his portrayal and his abilities are progressing.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's it for issue 74. I do have the back matter for 74, which starts a little note from Todd. It says, "I'm curious to know from my readers of Spawn, why they do or they don't read Curse of the Spawn. Right, and let me know your specific reasons for why you like or don't like it."
Oh boy.
Oh boy. First letter's from Shane Norwood of Woodward, Oklahoma, that says, "Dear Todd McFarlane, I got my first Spawn comic book, number 64. I thought Spawn was neat, but my dad won't let me get it anymore because of the bad words, and on the cover was 666. Please stop with the bad words and devil stuff. If you stop, I'll tell my friends about Spawn. Help me help you."
Oh my God.
Todd does respond to this, and basically he explains it like he is explaining it to an adult that said the same thing to him, instead of like brushing it aside, which is kind of nice. But basically, he doesn't think that Spawn is a satanic book, and that he is not a saint or a believer in Christianity, and he doesn't think that damn it or goddamn are really bad words. He says, in a weird way, the comic book is closer to something you should be passing on to Dad that he might actually like if he read a couple issues. Pass them on to him. Maybe in a couple years, if your dad thinks it's okay, let me know if you're back. Thanks. Which is just kind of funny.
I mean, I actually think that's great.
Yeah.
I think that's great. If he's saying, I think that's really great. And I'll tell you why. Because I like that Todd is not saying, read it without your parents' permission, which would
Right.
obviously be the wrong thing to say. I think that I like that he's saying your dad seems to have an idea of what this comic is and also of what I'm saying. Why don't you give it to him? Maybe he'll understand my point of view. And then I think he'll see that this is a comic worth reading for you when you're old enough to handle the subject matter. I think
Yeah.
that is, in terms of responses to a kid who's like, my dad doesn't let me read this, I think that's probably the wisest way to reply.
Yeah, 100%. It's a very measured response. It's been very fun to see Todd go from like full of piss and vinegar, the first couple letters columns,
Yeah.
like, you don't like it, get out of here, to being like,
I don't
listen,
give a
man,
shit,
like,
Timmy. There's 500 more Timmys down the street.
yeah, exactly. To being like, listen, I don't know, pass them along to your dad. Maybe he'll like them. Maybe you can read them in a couple of years. The next letter, I'm going to read this whole one. It's really short. It says, Dear Todd, my wife and I are, of course, fans, hardcore fans of
Oh,
Spawn,
wow.
and have been for 2 years. I was introduced to Spawn at about issue 10 by a friend in my hometown. Then I was reintroduced to Spawn by my brother-in-law. When my friend had first shown me number 10, it perked my interest back into comics. You see, I was never a comic fan, as in I never got a regular series, but I kept track of most characters by scanning and flipping through comics at the mall. The
Okay.
only comics I ever used to buy were Green Lantern and G.I. Joe. Now I'm a Spawn extremist. My wife is
he's a
too.
Spawnvert.
My wife is too, along with my bro. Thank you for rekindling my comic fire. Now a question or two or three. Spawn was to appear in Neil Adams' Valeria the She-Bat for Continuity Comics in issues 3 and 4. I've got an advertisement for it in the back of Death Watch 2000 comic that shows it. Yet none of the comic shops here in Roanoke have ever even heard of it after I showed them the ad. Was it ever made, or is it too hard to find? If it was made, could you let me know how I could purchase one or more? Please respond to this, as it is very aggravating. Even if it is impossible to track one down if it was made, I'd still highly appreciate an answer to this enigma. Thank you for any help or even reading this letter. Sincerely and gratefully, Bevan C. Heath, Roanoke, Virginia. Todd says, there's actually quite a simple answer to your question here, Bevan. I was out looking for a couple things that would be interesting in the comic book market, and one of them was to potentially do a crossover with some sort of Neil Adams. He had a company called Continuity Comics at the time. Unfortunately, a few assumptions were made that didn't allow it to get off the ground, and by the time we figured out it wasn't going to work, there had already been a couple of advertising slips put out there. Ultimately, it was something that was talked about, but it never even got 1 inch off the ground other than a little bit of advertising and a couple of drawings. The book does not exist and will not exist in the future. You'll need to go chase your holy grail with some other book, I guess. So that's fun. Didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, I missed that. I wasn't really following continuity comics in 1998. I do recall some of it, but I was just not. The 1998 was kind of an era where a lot of little tiny books and publishers were starting to pop up. A lot of people were trying to follow the Image Comics blueprint of competing with Marvel and DC. You know, you had some that I loved, like Malibu and the Ultraverse. You had some like there was a lot going on. There were a lot of choices and a lot of options if you had a good comic store. And I gotta say, I'm impressed that Roanoke, Virginia, had even more than one.
More than
then,
one, yeah.
Because
Hey,
I've been to Roanoke, Virginia, several times.
Yeah, especially this would have been really right after a bigger collapse of comic book stores.
Yeah,
So.
I think people don't realize how much of a fad business comic book stores were.
Yeah.
Which there have been some that have endured, and God bless, and it's still a business that's out there. I love going to a comic store. Every time you and I are together, I feel like that's the number one thing that we do is we go to comic stores. And I always walk away with something great. But in the 90s, they were kind of like vape shops or Atkins shops or whatever, where they were just fads where people who didn't even give a shit about comics were opening it because people were buying comics.
Right.
And there was speculation booming. People were buying, if you had a comic shop in the right place, you could sell at the right time. You could sell this one guy 10 copies of one comic, and you just made $50 off this dude because he thinks that he's going to put his kid through college on Spider-Man #1. Never for once stopping to think that if that was possible, you wouldn't just be hoarding every copy of Spider-Man #1.
Right.
That's the problem, is that we still have some of that mentality. And I could talk about speculation and all that stuff for forever, but it's just interesting that some people, even I at the time, didn't quite realize how much of like a fad business they were, and how much work the people that have endured for this long have put in, and how much love you have to actually have for comics to still be running a comic store in 2024.
Absolutely.
2025 now.
The next letter is extremely long, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but to summarize, basically, this guy, there's some highlights. He says, Dear Todd, I wanted to write and answer the question you posed in the magic word section of Wizard issue 77. Where do new comic readers come from? One thing that's, I think, really interesting is that this now, as we're starting to see the print runs lower on Spawn, it kind of settle into an audience that maybe isn't growing as exponentially as it was right at the top.
The hype is kind of over.
It's died down. And also, number 70 whatever is going to sell a lot less than number 1. It's interesting that Todd's looking for answers. And I think that really does speak to who he is, as he's always just going to keep asking consumers, what do I have to do? What do I have to do? What am I doing wrong? And I think that's really interesting, because I don't think that we get a lot of that in many other businesses. This just came to my attention, is that Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast, any artist that draws for them, does a card for them, they're going to pay them for the art, but they are now, with their new contracts, they're not allowed to reprint that art on any merch or whatever they want, which was a main source of income for so many of these artists.
It's pretty fucked up.
Yeah, so it's interesting if Wizards would just ask their consumer, hey, should we let artists do that? Everybody would be like, yes, let them do that. Who cares?
Well, and you understand, the greed behind that. The greed behind that is people want to buy that shit. They'll buy it from us, and that means the artist is taking money from us. We could sell that. Are you selling it? No. If you sold it, would the artist get any money? No. And that's fucked up. That sucks. That's trash. So, I'm sure that big artists probably have provisions to be able to sell certain things at this point. But the fact that you can't just sell your own art
is crazy.
And you have to probably get written permission or contractual permission is crazy.
Yeah.
And, I just to point out also, like you said, especially people were buying Spawn #1 in 1990. What was it? 3?
2.
2. That's right. Because it was Spawn #1 in 1992. And that was the height of, this is the #1 of a new comic by the biggest artist in the industry.
Right.
You better buy it, and you better buy a fucking lot of it. And by 1998, like you said, 6 years later at this point, people aren't speculating on Spawn 74.
Yeah.
People aren't speculating on Spawn even 75.
First appearance of the Heap is not getting your kid through college.
Yeah, exciting new #1, the breakout character of 1998, was on every cover, literally. By 1998, we were already in the post-image bubble of, this was after Heroes Reborn. This is Heroes Return era at this point.
Yeah.
By 1998. So we've already seen the experiment of what happens when guys like Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld go all the way back around to the top of the mountain to having their own Marvel Comics imprint, what that looks like and what they're able to do with that. And it led back to a core, less 90s-ish, more timeless version of most of the characters that they were writing and drawing. Like the Avengers, that's when you got the holiest of holies, the Perez Busiek Avengers, which is just my favorite superhero run of all time.
Mm-hmm.
George Perez, the greatest superhero artist of all time.
Also, I'll say that Heroes Return is almost, it's a bit of a failure. right? Obviously, there are wins like getting Busiek, Perez, Avengers. But what I mean is that like trying to imageify Marvel Comics
Oh,
didn't
Heroes
really.
Reborn was
Sorry, Heroes
Heroes
Reborn. Excuse me.
was a was
Was
it was
a
a
failed
sharp decline.
right.
Put it that
And so
way, you know.
and so like it's funny because it does lead to the next try at doing that, which is Marvel Knights,
Yep.
and that being like, oh, we figured it out. We don't actually need the original guys. We just need a really good take and good artists that are still exciting.
Well, and it also leads directly to Ultimate Marvel.
Yeah.
Like Heroes Reborn was really the first attempt at that, to take two properties that were flagging in the mid 90s, the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, that were not comparing to Spider-Man and X-Men in terms of their effectiveness on the stands and their brand awareness with readers. There weren't no Avengers MCU films at that point. You know what I mean? So it was an attempt to take those two things and say the hottest creators in the world are now doing this their way. And it didn't really bring in the kind of a non-comic reading audience that I think they wanted. It quickly got more convoluted than even the main universe was, just by having it just be its own thing.
Yeah.
And I think that I can't say that Heroes Return wound up being a huge financial success, but I know it wound up being a big critical success. Especially the Kurt Busiek's Iron Man was also really, really good. Scott Lobdell's FF, okay. It had Alan Davis on art, which was fantastic, and that eventually led into the Wade Ringo Fantastic Four, which is another just holiest of holies. Mike Waringo, another of the greatest superhero artists of all time, while we're on that soapbox.
Truly. So in response to where do new readers come from, this guy says, demographically, I'm not your average bear. I'll tell you my own story. You can take it for what it's worth, and who knows, it might even help. Okay. I like some of these letter writers that are like, I'm really doing you a favor here, Todd McFarlane, millionaire. So he wasn't interested in comics when he was a kid. He like read Superman and Spider-Man, whatever. He lost interest in all that stuff once he discovered rock and roll. After that, music and girls were all he cared about until the mid-'80s. He was working at a small custom silk screen shop in Hermosa Beach, California. And directly across the street was a comic book store. By then, I'd already been to college where I'd had a brief love affair with heavy metal until good drawing seemed to be less than a necessary factor to getting published. And I spent 4 years learning to draw. I have a BFA.
Wow.
Oh my goodness. This guy's really given his life story in this letters column. They printed the entire thing. At that time, a whole bunch of small independent publishers had sprung up, and some were doing adult material, which I found fun. I think the artist who really hooked me was Dave Stevens. I love The Rocketeer.
Okay.
And it was like, finally, here's what I'd been missing from comics all those years ago and what I'd enjoyed in Mad. Good drawing, good stories, and the whole shebang. Then he goes on to say that he really liked Bernie Wrightson. And he's like, you probably didn't notice it at the time, but from what I can gather, Marvel was doing quite well. yeah, buddy. The Marvel's doing great in the 80s. The X-Men were rather new. The first movies were being made, and things looked rosy in superhero land. I guess he's really referring to Superman, not X-Men movies. The way that he writes it, though, he sounds like a time traveler.
I was also going to say, like, yeah, I think Todd McFarlane, of all people, understands how successful Marvel was in the 80s.
Yeah.
It kind of led to the comic this letter is being printed in.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, he picks up an issue of Spawn at a local 7-Eleven 2 or 3 years ago. I was quite taken with the artwork, same time wondering what this character was about. Didn't become hooked until about a year later. Like, Jesus, buddy, like, come on.
All right, man.
Once I became hooked, I began buying back issues, checking the racks for other titles, which might equal the quality. I found them slowly. Gen 13, is it Shy or She? Shy?
Oh, She? Yeah,
etc. It was a lot of fun, and the story in Spawn just got better and better. For the first time, I was hooked on superheroes, at least those from Image. Then came Witchblade and the Darkness, and it started getting nuts. There was Gen 13 bootleg, Curse of Spawn crossovers. It was just too much. I remember walking to the comic shop one day and thinking, damn it, they did it again. They got greedy. Now I'll have to spend $100 a month to get all the stories. It really felt bad. I have nothing against making money, but when it becomes gratuitous, it's kind of a turnoff. I was in the comic shop the other day. I saw no fewer than 5 current Gen books. Gen 12, Gen 14, Gen 13 bootleg. I just stood there and laughed. I didn't buy a single one, except Kabuki #1. All right, man.
Okay, well, great David
Good
Mack
book.
shout out.
He then
But
says that
also,
Capullo's good, but then now he looks sloppy and rushed. This is interesting because we talk about the art quite a bit. I still like the comic, but it's not quite the same. I think I notice it most on the covers and the huge blackness of the pages. It's just been a bit much lately. Maybe all that's needed is to tone down the tremendous darkness of the pages. Let the beauty of the inked lines show. Don't lose it all in those dark, muddy grays. As far as the covers go, I've always loved the ones that were clean, using the shape of the characters to create the design. And tell the Mac people to use the filters very, very judiciously.
yeah.
Bottom line, it's your book, it's your story, your ink work, and you're okay on the chromalin proofs. I'm just stating my opinion as a fan, and I'm a decent artist in my own right. I will continue to read Spawn because it's a great story. I also continue to read Witchblade and the New Kabuki by David Mack. Wow, this is an innovative book. I'm probably done with Gen 13. Dude, this is not a Gen 13 like column. You don't need to tell Todd that. I don't have cable, so I've never seen the Spawn series. I like the movie. John Leguizamo is great. Todd goes, thank you for your rather extensive letter and sharing the insight into your personal life and opinions as to what comic books mean to you, both good and bad. What makes you gravitate towards them and what irritates you once you get there. These are some of the insights I was looking for when I posed the question in Wizard Magazine. So good job, Fritz Pisinski. You followed directions. He says that he likes Dave Stevens as well. But that anytime we have an artist that we like their style, we have a tendency to become selfish and want them to do 100 pages a month so we can get our fix. They become our visual drug, if you will. It's always disappointing when we can't have as much as we like. He goes, as for your comments about Mr. Capullo, you can look at the early issues that Greg did and see that today his artwork is superior in terms of line count and quality of detailed background. His style has continued to evolve to the point where it's a perfect match and I'm able to bring in all these odd characters that I need each month. As for Too Much Black, the book is very moody and atmospheric, something we use as part of graphics and design of the book. We'll watch and make sure we don't go too far, but it is the world that Spawn lives in. As for all your other comments, I find it to be interesting on what spikes your personal interests. I hope this may be a catalyst to other people as to why they are comic book fans, either for a short period of time, a long period of time, or why they stopped and started, and give me the pros and cons of it. Thank you for your letter. Bye.
Well, I mean, if he's a Bernie Wrightson fan, I get why he's like doesn't want big slathers of black and wants to see the lines, but also that's just a different style.
Yeah.
I mean, what an extensive letter. Yeah, sure, man. Great. Thank you for sharing. You really also, why do you feel like
I like that we get frustrated sometimes with letters from 25 years ago.
Old. Yeah, 25 years ago. Look, it's like this. If you don't want to read Gen 15 or whatever, don't.
Yeah, exactly. Which is what Todd would have said, a bunch of issues ago. He would have been like, don't like it, don't read it. But
yeah, you don't have to buy it. But now he's like, please buy it though. But also like Curse of the Spawn though, you want to buy that, right? We're finding.
But why don't you
find
want to
out?
buy it? Anyway, that's it. That's it for these 2 issues. Next episode is going to be Spawn number 75 and 76. That will
another
be
big milestone issue for us. That's great.
Yeah, Sacred Ground and Farewell Dance, respectively. Before we get to sort of the outro, final thoughts, George, on the introduction of the Heap.
Loved it. Thought the Heap looked awesome. Thought the explanation behind it worked really well in the issue. I didn't need more than it gave me. I thought that it moved really fast and it was an exciting read as a result. I thought the art was fantastic. Lettering was great as usual. I thought the script was really good. I thought it had its highlights. 2 really fun issues of Spawn that I really enjoyed. Loved the Heap. I could look at drawings of the Heap by Greg Capullo forever. It was just so good. So yeah, loved this 2-parter. I'm excited for 75.
Yeah, I have to fully agree with you. These were great issues. They were a lot of fun. They moved in ways that when the book has been cooking in the past, it is usually doing. It feels like, even though 75 is next, it feels like we're already looking to 100 and we're already like something huge is happening, and can you even believe that this is going to happen before we get there?
Right.
That's really exciting. The Heap is awesome. It looks really cool. It's nice to not have him be a cyborg. And, you had mentioned the influence of Grant Morrison and Neil Gaiman, and it definitely feels like that's inherent in this book. I like having a guy like Eddie Beckett taking over Cagliostro's normal role of being obtuse, because we're probably not going to see him very, very much. It makes it a lot less frustrating as a reader because Cog can just communicate better. This guy's new. He doesn't know whatever. He's kind of nobody in the world of Spawn to this point. So I think these two issues are really like they avoid a lot of the bad habits that we've seen build up over the years in terms of like how to move the narrative forward and how to like give us stakes for all the characters that are involved.
Right.
There's nice little reminders without staying with characters for too long, like Terry and Wanda, even Sam and Twitch, right? Sam and Twitch also, they get to be a little funny without delving too far into the crassness that sometimes defines Sam specifically.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sam got to be funny and kind of goofy without it being like, oh, I got to take a fart.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm really liking I'm liking Holguin's influence on the book. And I mean, I'd be curious to know what that work breakdown looks like. Danny Meeke absolutely killing it, being the lead inker on 2 issues in a row.
Absolutely.
Just, this is some good stuff. Like, this is almost like stuff that I would just give to somebody as their first issues to just be like, I don't know, you want to have fun?
Yeah.
You're not going to really know totally what's going on, but enough is explained.
Not a bad first couple issues because they actually do tell you exactly what the stakes are, exactly who Al Simmons was. I mean, not a bad introduction to Spawn, if I actually say so, aside from the fact that he's not in half of the first issue, but you still get the explanation of who he is, and it's still a fun read.
Totally. Before the true outro, do you have any recommendations for listeners this week?
Let's see. What am I doing this week? I'm going to recommend that you listeners, if there's anyone in your life that you really care about that you haven't reached out to in a while, that you haven't talked to, just hit them up. Doesn't matter what you say. Just say, hey, yo, how's it going? Something like that, because friends and people in your life are very valuable, and you never know when those conversations will become beyond your reach. So do that.
Totally. On a lighter note, I'm going to recommend Spawn Kills Every Spawn.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Thanks again to Rob. And, fun comics are fun. When Spawn's at his best, when he's fun. So
absolutely.
And not kind of bogged down by a bunch of nonsense.
We just gushed over 2 issues of him fighting trash.
Yeah, literally. So, if you like the show, thank you so much for listening. Obviously, we can't do this without you, dear listeners. And if you like the show, please rate, review, subscribe on whatever podcatcher you use, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. We're on all of those. If you leave us a review, obviously we'll read it on the air. And, it's just really helpful. Just tell another Spawn fan. You can find us on the internet at Spawnography or at Spawnography Pod on various different platforms. I don't need to go through them all. And I think that's pretty much it. George, for Todd so loved the world,
he gave his only begotten Spawn.
See you later, Hellspawn.
Spawn!